In 2019, a notorious quote was made by Ryan Lutzberg that went along the lines of being good at playing a character is valuable, but I think I'll take the 200 plus collective years of professional game design experience. Not too long after, Riot released Aphelios, widely considered the most overloaded champion League has ever seen before, both in scope and depth. From then on, the quote obtained meme status, being used to poke fun at any instance of the champion or balance team's questionable design choices. While many people think of Aphelios as the poster child of the 200 years meme, there was another champion who similarly evoked a feeling of overloadedness. Akshan, a fellow marksman. Akshan was the third of a trio of champions to be released in 2021 up until that point, who achieved infamy for showcasing everything wrong with modern champion design philosophy, that being shoving as much crap into their movesets as possible for the hell of it. Despite such inflammatory reception though, Akshan's one of the game's more niche picks, barely scraping past 3% in Diamond Plus despite being more suited for high elo. It's even more unusual for him to have such a low presence when he was intended to be a flex pick, and as you know, champions who can frequent multiple roles tend to maintain a presence of around 5% or more. So for today's Why No One Plays video, we'll be investigating Akshan to find out how a champion we all thought would be completely busted has been steadily losing popularity over the past year and change. Akshan's another one of those curious champions where all signs point to him being a far more popular champion than he actually is, and I'm not even talking about his abilities yet. For starters, he's a marksman capable of fending for himself and prefers to fight alone compared to being supported down in bot lane. Solo lane marksmen are generally seen as a taboo in League, evidenced by the likes of Zeri, Tristana, Lucian, and Smolder having been actively nerfed in such a way that heavily discourages playing them outside of bot lane. In addition, Akshan has perennially maintained a win rate above 51%, typically hanging around 52 to 53%, and is commonly agreed upon to be a very high skill ceiling champion, whose performance and viability improve the higher up you go. Couple that with the supposed overloaded kit many have labeled him to possess, myself included, and you'd think he would give off the same sort of vibe as the 4 horsewomen of top lane or champions like Zed and Rengar. Akshan's pick rate does increase the higher up you go, but he's been consistently declining ever since he came out back in mid-2021, reaching the lowest he's ever been, and there doesn't appear to be any indication of him coming back up. So what gives? If I could summarize why he's unpopular, it would be that there's a difference between being overloaded in theory and being overloaded in practice. Akshan's more of the former, not to say he's all bark and no bite, rather the context of overloaded attributes and their applications matter far more than the actual attribute in question. It's not what you have, but how it's used and what it's used with. That's sort of the overall message with Akshan. You can't just take him at face value, so let's start by addressing the first reason why no one plays him. Akshan's not a very intuitive champion. In both my YeastBeast video as well as my ranged top laners video, I talked about how the main drawback to these types of champions is that, in exchange for having more pressure and subsequent dominance in lane, you relinquish party coverage in the long term. Though a marksman, Akshan's a lot closer to Quinn and Kindred than he is to Twitch or Vayne, ironic on account of him also using a crossbow. Basically, while he offers immense DPS and kill pressure, the fact that he's meant to be played in solo lanes means your team will more likely than not have 2 marksmen, and marksmen are characterized for having next to no general utility. They're just all damage. Akshan couldn't be more emblematic of that. He forfeits all semblance of team play in favor of personal kill pressure, leading to many instances where either you, the person playing him, or your team wish you had anyone else due to the imbalance of party composition. When I say imbalance, I'm referring to situational coverage. For example, if you decide to play Akshan mid, what champions do you typically find there? Mages and assassins. Mages come in all shapes and forms, but they typically share a list of qualities that are conducive to a more well-rounded team comp, that being zone control, AoE damage, hard CC, and/or neutral pressure to name a few. Assassins excel at picking out priority targets in record time, blitzing through enemy lines to snipe out isolated enemies, and getting out as fast as they came in. Contrived as it may sound, destabilizing the enemy team by making them afraid to advance forward because of an enemy assassin is indeed a form of utility. Akshan may be a top and mid laner, but he can't fulfill the expectations of other top and mid laners, since he operates in a very unorthodox way. You could try to argue that being part assassin he can do the assassination thing too, but let's face it, Akshan compared to a Talon, Kiana, LeBlanc, not the same thing. So what does Akshan have that other mid laners don't? Staying power. Given most mid laners are ability casters, while Akshan's primarily auto attack based, he can outlast them in drawn out fights. The issue is that Akshan doesn't really offer anything of import to his team that other champions can't also do. The only advantage he carries is more lane pressure, which you can easily tell given the fact that he often has a gold lead in most matchups by 15 minutes. Team composition tends to get dismissed in solo queue as a result of the lack of voice communication, making proper 5v5 or concerted macro plays difficult to achieve. But skirmishes and teamfights do consistently happen, and unless the enemy team has a worse team comp than you, Akshan's inability to afford anything but DPS can be a detriment. Even if you were to play another mid laner who is also mostly damaged, they still have something that can alleviate the burden from your team in some capacity. The long range of Xerath can serve as cover fire for your team and neutral pressure, great if you're trying to contest objectives or scout out enemies. Akshan's range is nowhere near sufficient at pulling this off. The threat of Katarina jumping in on the enemy team and one-shotting everyone in seconds offers your team an incredible advantage state if you're able to get on the offensive. Akshan on the other hand is less rushdown oriented and more focused on picking out targets one by one. The area control of Anivia can help in slowing down enemy advance, coupled with their AoE stun on her Q and her anti-sieging capability. Akshan can't do any of those things. Having very few direct ways to contribute to his team, you have to approach the game in a very different way than you would other top or mid laners. You can't just play like a typical marksman and go front to back. I mean, you can, but if you're doing just that, you could do so much better with a different champion. Instead, you have to look for key opportunities that call for a specialist like Akshan, not the least of which being his W passive, the one form of utility he does have. Being able to score a takedown on the enemy team member who just killed two or even one of your guys has so many implied consequences on the map that cannot be measured. If your jungler died to the enemy jungler and you as the Akshan player got them back, not only does the enemy team lose their smite, but you gain yours back. And it doesn't even have to be the jungler. Instantly reviving anyone, even though 0-10 Yona is a big deal because that's a whole champion with abilities that can be used to apply pressure, if even a little bit. People tend to underestimate how important numbers advantage is in this game. Because of this, Akshan operates extremely differently from other marksmen and assassins, making it so you can't just pick him up and get the hang of him after a dozen games. He has a very high skill floor, but unlike other high skill floor champs like Aphelios and Akali who are much more popular, Akshan's also somewhat of an impractical champion. Like I said earlier, there's a difference between being overloaded in concept and in practice. A champion like Yona is overloaded in practice. Not only does he possess a vast arsenal of tools, but most if not all of them can be used in a wide variety of circumstances. Stuff like AoE crowd control, long-range dashes, and hybrid damage have guaranteed value. Akshan's overloadedness on the other hand isn't quite as assured. Let's call back to going rogue. Even though it has the potential to be one of the most game-breaking abilities in the game, it can also just as easily be one of the most irrelevant abilities in the game. You might think infinite stealth and infinite mana regeneration is overpowered, and it is, but only on paper. In practice, it's not as straightforward. This applies to all of Akshan's active abilities. Avenger Ring looks like an overpowered version of Sivir's Q. It is comparable damage and scaling to her Boomerang Blade, but with a shorter cooldown, no loss in damage on subsequent targets. It can travel forever with each enemy hit, and it gives a boost of speed upon striking champions. In application, it's honestly an inconsistent version of Boomerang Blade in most ways, having a smaller hitbox, way less range at base, and the dynamic range calculation actually making it more difficult to line up the return course. Same thing for Heroic Swing. On paper, this is one of the most powerful mobility tools in the game. Depending on how you use it, you can do a small circle or a long circle. You can use it to circle around in ways to allow for more airtime to then fire more shots. Oh yeah, it also fires shots that apply on-hit effects. You can jump off the swing at any time to prematurely cancel it, and it resets on takedowns. I remember when people saw this, they were like, "Oh hell no!" But in practice, Akshan sees a really awkward ability to use that most of the time it would just be more efficient to have a regular dash ability like the one on Lucian or Graves. Comeuppance is probably the most egregious example. On site, people immediately compared Akshan's ultimate to Caitlyn's headshot, and to be frank, it's almost always worse than Caitlyn's. Yes, depending on how you use it, it can pump out even more damage than Caitlyn's headshot, but it can also do absolutely nothing as you can hide behind a tower or minions in addition to other champions. Furthermore, it only deals good damage if the target's at low HP. Realistically, the only part of his kit that's actually practical would be his passive, which in my opinion is one of the best passives of all time. Unfortunately for him, it happens to also be the one aspect of his kit they targeted the most. This passive is horse. The one part of his kit that's as broken as it reads. 2 auto attacks with every basic. He can cancel the second one to get a burst of speed. A 3-hit passive that deals damage and grants a shield if it's a champion. This move is fucked up, which is why they had to nerf it so much. In 12.3, Dirty Fighting lost early game damage and speed. Then in 12.10, coinciding with the durability update, they lowered the shield value. Then in 13.10, they lowered the shield value again to where it's a lot weaker in the early game. Then in 14.12, they made it so the proc damage increases based on level breakpoints instead of incrementally. Essentially, all aspects of Dirty Fighting got nerfed, among other things. Most of these nerfs targeted Akshan's early game where he's at his best. I mean, you can argue late game's where he's at his best, but to get to late game you have to first go through early game, and like most lane bullies, if Akshan doesn't acquire a lead early, he's pretty much worse than if you were to play a conventional mid or top laner. To his credit, he is one of the best laning phase roamers courtesy of Heroic Swing's amazing distance coverage and his perma-stealth, but when caught in a bad position it can be tough to fight your way out, making him a very unforgiving champion to play in the early game, where he should be forgiving. In essence, Akshan's a prime example of how more details can backfire on a champion, making him a more ambiguous and convoluted version of other champions. You can think of it like this: Akshan has the potential to do more than other marksmen, but he also has the potential to do a lot less, therefore making him a much less consistent champion. A big part of what determines if a champion is popular or not is how straightforward they are and how clearly defined they are in terms of function and purpose for their team. The reason Malphite's consistently picked is because he couldn't be more straightforward if you tried. Super easy to pick up, has a clear role of being a big meat shield for your team, screwing over auto attackers and AD champs, and his iconic ultimate being the only thing you need to land. Thankfully though, we have a ton of tanks and AP champs in top lane who keep him from spiraling out of control. Akshan, however, is a lot more ambiguous. Sure, he's an assassin marksman who specializes in picking off targets one by one, but how exactly does he go about doing that? Therein lies the problem. Not only is acquiring a lead unclear on Akshan, but snowballing that lead's also unclear, as is coming back from behind. He might have some of the best DPS in the game when you start racking up items, but if he's caught in a bad spot, you're completely screwed, setting him apart from other assassins who typically have ways to escape a sketchy situation. And you have to consider all of this while being aware of the fact that if all else fails, you cannot default to a role. Other early game champions like Pantheon, even if he falls behind, he can still be a stun bot and still semi-frontline for your team with Aegis Assault. Akshan can't just sit back and play like a marksman front to backing because the enemy team might have a champion more suited for that if it's a mid laner, or they might have a strong top laner who can out-pressure you in a fight. And once more, like most other assassins who can potentially sacrifice himself for a 1-for-1, Akshan doesn't have the same rushdown mobility of a Talon, Zed, Katarina, or Iona. He's caught in this weird limbo state where there's no clear defined path for him to carry a game. Some games he has to do this, other games he has to do that. His kit's designed in such a way that you basically have to thread the needle to find the perfect set of circumstances that demand his specific toolset. That's why Akshan has a very high win rate but a very low play rate. The only people who play him are one-tricks who develop a keen eye for how to take him all the way. But the margin for error has gotten really tight following the nerfs to his kit. I remember DMing Drutune about a year ago, and he emphasized how for other snowballing champions, it's very easy to push your lead because you can just play to whatever win condition they have, and if you're fed, you're always going to succeed if you meet that condition. Whereas Akshan has a lot more variables you have to account for that may or may not necessarily allow you to play to your win condition. Not to mention that win condition can fluctuate every game, and it's on a champion with a kit that's a lot less practical than it looks. Lunatic Blizzard on Reddit summarized Akshan quite well, and I want to quote them really quickly. The thing about Akshan is that he has a lot of toys, possibly more than any other champion. Unfortunately for him, very few of his toys actually fit together, so he's just throwing a little bit of everything at you. His Q has ridiculous range. If everyone is standing in a straight line, he can technically res a quadra kill if somehow he's the last person to survive and manages to kill the person who wiped your team by himself. He has Lucian's double hit, but it's not nearly as good or fast. He has a 3-hit passive with that double shot, but the worst attack speed ratio in the game. He gets a shield from his passive, but the cooldown's painfully long and the shield is honestly not that big. So on and so forth. Ultimately, the biggest reason why Akshan's not as popular as he could be is because he can only really perform when, true to his passive, he's fighting dirty. He's designed to lose against basically the entire cast in a fair fight. That's why he sucks in bot lane where it's all about head-on confrontation. Everything in his kit is meant to work only in unfair circumstances for the enemy team, and the onus is on you to orchestrate them. This makes Akshan the perfect solo queue champion where you can take full advantage of the absence of coordination on the enemy team and the idea of every man for himself. However, it comes with a skill floor too high and a skill ceiling that's even higher. He's basically a ranged version of Shaco. He has to play dirty to win, but is even more forced to play like that. Thank God too, it would be a pain in the ass if Akshan was played more than he is. What do you guys think of Akshan? Do you agree with my points or do you think it's something else entirely? Feel free to share in the comments down below. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at VarsFarum, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.